This is the BBC Home Service. We take you again directly to our Dudley studio for a short rendition from Great Uncle Stanley. Albert's Reunion by Stanley Holloway. Now you've heard of young Albert Ramsbottom and Mrs Ramsbottom and Dad, and the trouble the poor lion went through trying to stomach the lad. Well, after the lion disgorged him, quite many a day had gone by, but the lion just sat there and brooded, with a far-away look in his eye. The keepers could do nought with the lion. He seemed to be suffering pain. He seemed to be fretting for something, and the curl all went out of his mane. He looked at his food and ignored it, just gazed far away into space. When keepers tried forcible feeding, well, they all got it back in their face. And at Mr and Mrs Ramsbottom's, the same kind of thing had begun. And though they tried all sorts of measures, they couldn't rouse Albert, their son. Now Mr Ramsbottom's got fed up at trying to please him in vain, and said, if you don't start to buck up, I'll take you to that lion again. Now instead of the lad getting frightened and starting to quake at the knees, he seemed to be highly delighted and shouted, "Oh Dad, if you please." His father thought he'd gone potty. His mother went nearly insane. But Albert stood firm and just bellowed, "I want to see lion again." So Mr and Mrs Ramsbottom decided the best thing to do was to give way to Albert and take him all that way back to the zoo. The moment the lion saw Albert, for the first time for weeks it had stirred. It moved the left side of his whiskers, then lay on his back and just purred. Now before anybody could stop him, young Albert was stroking his paws, and whilst the crowd screamed for the keepers, well, the lion just opened its jaws. The crowd were completely dumbfounded. His mother was out to the wide, but they knew by the bumps and the bulges that Albert was once more inside. Then all of a sudden the lion stood up and let out a roar, and Albert, all smiling and happy, came out with a thud on the floor. The crowd by this time were all cheering, and Albert stood there looking grand, with the stick with the horse's head handle clutched in his chubby young hand. The lion grew so fond of Albert, it couldn't be parted from the lad, and so zoological keepers sent round a note to his dad. "We regret to say Lion is worried and pining for your little man, so sending your lion tomorrow, arriving in plain covered van. Now if you should go round any evening, when Albert has gone off to rest, there's the lion all tucked up beside him, asleep with his head on his chest."